We have been looking at a scripture that is certainly one of my favorites. It's a little passage in John 13, verse 34 and 35. It's the verse that we're going to pass out on the cards today. David's got this. And really want to encourage you to think about this little passage. It's one of the easiest passages to remember. It really, really is. And it's the key verse of the text that Matt started on last week, and I'm going to kind of finish up on today. I'm going to really look at these two little verses and unpack those and kind of talk about the significance of the new command. In John 13, we've seen three things happen. We saw Jesus give an example of, a great example of love. And that example was service. He served his disciples, washed their feet. We spent a week on that. We then looked at the great betrayal of love. That Judas betrayed Christ in that great betrayal, which kind of ushered in this very dark moment in the Last Supper. It says it was night and Judas went out with the full intent of betraying Christ as he did. Last week, Matt talked about the setting of the new command. Because Jesus chose to lay down this new command to love one another. He chose to lay that down in the midst of three things going on. One was in the midst of darkness, because darkness set the stage for the brilliance of God's glory. You think about when Jesus, right, this is on Thursday night, Friday he's crucified. And that crucifixion was maybe the darkest day on planet Earth. It was when mankind crucified God. And in the middle of the day, when Jesus hung on the cross, about noon during the day, do you remember what happened? There was an eclipse, right? There was an eclipse, and the world went dark. The sun went black. And so it was like God turned his back on sin. The darkest moment gave the setting for the brilliance of God's greatest glory to be known. His death for mankind's sin and his resurrection. The next thing that happens, Jesus tells the disciples that he's going to go away. And so throughout the whole Gospel of John, Jesus has been saying, follow me. Follow me, follow me. In fact, that's the name of our series, Follow Jesus, following Jesus. Jesus has been telling them to follow him, follow him, follow him. He gets to chapter 13 and says, you cannot go where I'm going. You can no longer follow me. You can't follow me to the cross right now, and you can't follow me to heaven. I mean, we all want to go to heaven, right? Just not right now, right? And so Jesus says, you can't go with me to heaven now. You're going to have to stay. And so Jesus' departure sets the stage for the coming of the Spirit that you and I need to follow Jesus. We need him. We desperately need his Spirit to follow him well. And so the darkness set the stage for the brilliance of God's glory being shown in the crucifixion and resurrection. The departure of Jesus sets the stage for the coming of the Spirit, the presence of God that would inhabit our hearts. And lastly, the denial of Peter is the third thing that happens in this context. And Peter's denial is, a surprise to Peter even, right? Even a surprise to Peter. Have you ever felt like you've kind of denied the Lord in some way, shape, or form? Anybody feel able to just confess that freely? Yeah. We all have, to some degree, denied the Lord. The interesting thing about his denial was it was a failure. It was a falling short. And none of us like to fall short, do we? None of us do. And yet, I bet most of us have had times when you thought you were doing great, and then you petered out. Have you had that times like that? I'm going strong, and then you petered out. I'm doing well, and then you fail. I think that what that can usher in a greater grasp of God's forgiveness. Is that when we fail, we're reminded that we've got a God that's dealt with the penalty of our failures. And so some of you, you're bound and determined still to beat yourself up for that, but you don't have to, because Jesus was beat up for you for that, for your failures. And so he wants you to rise back up and to recognize a deeper level of God's forgiveness. And so I hope that even as we talk today, more light will shine into your hearts, the brilliance of God's glory. You'll see it in a more beautiful, personal way. I hope that you'll recognize the Spirit of God wants to inhabit your heart, to give you strength to walk the life God's called you to walk. And I hope that even in the midst of your failures, your denials, your shortcomings, you'll experience God's forgiveness at a deeper level. As we look at the significance, that's the setting. Matt looked at that last week, did a great job. Today we're going to kind of finish this message up with the significance of the Great Command, the significance of it. So think about this verse with me. Here it is. A new command I give you. Say this with me. Love one another. Just say that again. Love one another. If you've got that much of this verse memorized, you almost got the whole verse memorized. Say it again. Love one another. Let's go back to the beginning. A new command I give you. As I have loved you, so you must. By this all men will know that you are my disciples if you. You got it, right? There it is. Pretty simple, right? 3 times he says it, and we're going to look at actually 4 aspects about this new command, 4 things that bring significance to it. So I want us to kind of think about the fact that, this new command that God gives is our marching orders. It's really his instructions to us on how to move forward. In his departure, his Spirit comes and empowers us to do what? To love one another. Yeah, and so when God gives us the ability to do that, it's because his Spirit overrides our selfish spirit. How many know that you've got a selfish spirit inside of you? Some of you are still in denial. Okay, that's all right. That's okay. The person next to you will enlighten you later, I'm sure, that you have a selfish spirit inside of you. And that selfish spirit inside of you is always in contention with this new life-giving spirit of God's presence that wants to make you a better lover. I mean, when you're a better lover, everybody wins, right? I mean, you win when you're a better lover because you feel better about yourself. If you're married, your partner they win because they definitely like you when you're a better lover. Your kids win. Your coworkers win. Your neighbors win. Even your enemies win when you say you love Jesus and you're a better lover. So wouldn't it be great if we could get a better handle on what it looked like to be better lovers? It'd be good. Good. What if this little new command had a new impact on the way you treated those around you? I hope it comes to that today. I think about the 4 things we'll look at. We're going to look at a new focus. We're going to look at a new standard. We're going to look at a new power. We're going to look at a new outcome. So think about the verse again. A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, Jesus says, you also must love one another. By this, here's the outcome. By this, all men will what? Know that you are my disciples. That outcome is powerful. It's huge. It's saying that literally the greatest apologetic we have for our faith is our ability to love others well. You know what an apologetic is? It's not an apology. An apologetic is a defense for something. And so your defense for what you believe, your apologetic spiritually, the best defense you have for your faith is the relationships around you that are filled with love. It's the greatest apologetic. The world's going to pay more attention to how you are loved and how you love in our community of faith than they will with whatever argument you make about the death, resurrection, who Jesus is, the Bible. The greatest evidence. Why? Because everybody wants love. Everybody wants to be valued and important and special. And so if a hungry world for that can look at the church and see a loving community of believers, guess what? They're going to want to be involved. They're going to want to get closer to that. But I'm afraid that doesn't always happen. The world outside doesn't always look at the church and say, man, they're so loving, I gotta join that group. I don't think that always happens. I wish it did. Don't you wish it did in this place? In your relationships? There was a lady that her and her husband were fighting the reality of his health degrading. And then finally they went to the doctor and they got a thorough examination. And the doctor left the husband in one room, went to talk to the wife, came in and says, ma'am, I don't like the way your husband looks. And she interrupts the doctor and says, well, I don't either, but how's his health? That wasn't very nice. You see, for her, there was a difference between his health and how he looked. With the church, those things are inextricably linked. You see, the world can oftentimes look at the church and say, I don't like the way the church looks. They can oftentimes look at a body of believers and say, I don't like the way they look over there. I don't like how they treat one another. I don't like the way they talk about one another. I don't like how they look. But you see, the health of the church is inextricably linked to how we look. And if we are more healthy in our ability to love well, then we look good. And so I'm concerned, God's concerned about your health, about your spiritual health, and how you look. How do people around you perceive you look spiritually? Jesus says when they see you being an extravagant lover, they're going to see the health of my body. And so I want us to just be a healthy place. Isn't that a good goal for us? To be a healthy people? So let's look at things. The first thing is the focus of the new command. The focus of the new command. And so really I just want to talk for a little bit about another idea. The significance of the new command is a new focus to love one another. Now, the idea of loving one another is a great idea, and we certainly would say we want your family to love one another. Jesus says, I want my body of believers to love one another. But if there's a new command, then it would kind of stand to reason there must be a An old command. Yeah, right? There's a new command. He wouldn't say, a new command I give you, if he wasn't giving some kind of contrast to an old command. And so what is the old command? Well, we know we got the old commandments, right? We've got 10 of those, and then you've got about 613 other ancillary commands that are given in Jewish literature that kind of supported those 10. That's a lot of commands to have to remember, right? And so Jesus kind of boils it down and says, I want to give you a new command, but the biggest contrast to this new command to love one another is this old command found in Leviticus chapter 19. It says, do not take revenge against one of your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. Remember, we call that the golden. Yeah, right? Love your neighbor as yourself, right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Kind of the golden rule. That's where we get the idea of the golden rule from the command that Jesus gave the children of Israel in Leviticus. But I want you to notice that when he says, love your neighbor, who did the Israelites take as their neighbor? Well, clearly it says, your people. Do not take a revenge against your people. So they saw that as that I loved my neighbor Jew, my Jewish neighbor. That's who I loved. And that's who I went the extra mile for. Now, here's the contrast of that, okay? So we're going to follow the line of this old command, because if there's this idea of loving your neighbor, the Jewish community, what it ended up doing was it created an ethnic limitation. An ethnic limitation. So you think about ethnicity, right? And we've got beautiful, by the way, I love that you are so ethnically diverse here, right? I think that Asian people are beautiful, don't you? Yay! I'm glad we have the ethnicity of Asian community in our church. I like the black community. I think black brothers and sisters are beautiful, don't you? Yes, I do. And you might say, what about you, Pastor? What are you? You're a honky community, right? The honky community is even beautiful, right? I mean, there's all these ethnicity, but it's not always been so, ability to kind of cooperate and get along. I mean, that's happening more and more. But further you go back in history, the more ethnic divide there is, right? I mean, you think about ethnicity, and it was a dividing factor, even a factor filled with hostility because of people's ethnic diversity. It's in our own nation's history. We don't have to go back very far. The civil rights movement built around that whole issue of ethnicity and the divide and equal rights. Certainly fraught with difficulty to think about ethnicity as a place not just to recognize differences, but to have hostility in our differences. The Jews fell prey to that as well. There was nothing wrong with the command. God's command was good. It was holy. But what it ended up doing was creating an ethnic limitation. And so what happened for the Jewish people is they used it as a reason to exclude others. So in that ethnic limitation, it became a place to stop. I'm going to love my Jewish neighbor. I'm going to stop there. I'm not going to love my Gentile neighbor. In fact, if I'm a Jewish zealot, I might slit his throat, right? So in the time that we're talking about, the Jews that were zealots were absolutely anti-Rome and anything Gentile, and would literally attack them if they got the opportunity to do it. Okay? So a far cry from loving your enemy as yourself. Okay? They were not my neighbor. I don't have to love them. So it created a stopping place for their love. If you're a Jew, I'll love you. If you're not, I'll think about it and maybe not. Jesus confronted this issue often. He confronted this issue often. Probably one of the most classic cases was in Luke chapter 10. Remember the story? Jesus tells a story about what's known as the Good Samaritan. Remember who the Samaritans were? The Samaritans were the people group that evolved out of a very difficult time in Israel's history. Israel had just kind of finished coming through a time of division under King Absalom, Solomon's son, and there was a division in the kingdom. 10 tribes stayed in the north. 2 tribes went to the south. They divided. The tribes that stayed in the north were known as Israel. Those that went to the south were known as Judah. Israel was attacked by Assyria, a foreign nation, who literally came in and dominated them, but rather than destroy them or put them into servitude, they decided to bring other people groups into that area so the Jews would marry with other people groups, weakening the bloodline. So if you've weakened the bloodline, your ethnicity is not as pronounced, is it? Their ethnicity was beginning to change, and this group, 600 years prior to Jesus being on the planet, have this added to the equation, which creates the group of people known as the Samaritans, half-breeds. And the Jew, the pure-blood Jew, despised and hated the Samaritan, would have nothing to do with them. They lived on the wrong side of the tracks. Literally, when it came to the area of Samaria, a Jew would come to that area and literally go a detour around that in order not to interface with a Samaritan. I would say it's a pretty significant ethnic divide, wouldn't you? Pretty significant. You see, so for them, when they came to Samaria, love stopped. It was a place to stop, not a place to love more, but a place to love less. So Jesus tells the story. There's a man that's beat up, left half dead in the ditch, and a priest comes along. Certainly a priest is someone honored in the Jewish community. He's our highest religious leader. Comes along, sees the man in the ditch, bypasses the man, goes on the other side of the road, and leaves him in the ditch and goes on his way. Then he says, a Levite comes along. A Levite was from son of Jacob, the 12 tribes of Israel. Levi was one of those people groups under Jacob. And that particular tribe, the Levites, had special responsibilities in the tabernacle. Again, a heavy mantle of religious authority. The Levite comes along, Jesus says, sees the man in the ditch, and he too passes and goes around the man and leaves him. Then he says, what would be a burr in any Jew's saddle, a Samaritan comes along and sees the man in the ditch, stops, tends to his wounds, puts him in his own Honda Civic, and takes him to the nearest town, stops by the motor inn, drops him off and says, take care of him and I will be back to pay the bill. And then Jesus turns to the Jewish audience and says, who was the good neighbor? The foreigner, the Samaritan. You see, Jesus confronted this notion all the time, trying to help break down the old idea of what love does. Because in the old ethnic limitation of love your Jewish neighbor only, it was a place to stop. And in that stopping, there was an exclusion that took place. An exclusion of anybody not like them. Have you ever had that experience? You know, where you came into an environment and you were different. You were different. Maybe you're a different color, a different race. Maybe you spoke a different language. Maybe you weren't the people that always hung together at the workplace. But you felt like the outsider, not the insider. How'd that feel? You see, the kind of love that stops with my own evaluation of who my neighbor is a kind of love that never reaches people that are on the outside when we're on the inside. C.S. Lewis told a graduating class at Cambridge University that no greater temptation would face them than the temptation to create an inner ring of community that was special because it excluded others. I think that temptation is still there for us today. We can have the experience of us four and no more. We can say, I got my own friends that I'm close to, and let's just put everybody else out at an arm's distance. I don't want them in because this group is special. It's kind of like this. I mean, gossip does that. I was with some people not long ago, and they began to talk about somebody, and then the other person chimed in and talked about that person, and I could tell they had this little sense of agreement that the other person, the third party that was not present, was not accepted. They were the jerk, and they were the ones that recognized he was a jerk. If I don't particularly like Joe, it's comforting to find somebody else who doesn't like Joe. Now I have an inner ring of two people who don't like Joe. And that feels more special because we're together and Joe's out of the circle. You see, all of us have a propensity to have this old standard that's an inadequate standard. And Jesus says, I want to give you a new command. So what's so new about the new command? It's a new focus, to love one another. In Galatians it says that here in the church there's neither Greek nor Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free. He talks about ethnic diversity, economic diversity, moral diversity. He says, here there's no longer that divide. Here's the place where we need to learn to love one another, no matter what our ethnicity, no matter what our color, no matter what our background is. This is the place when we love like that, the world's going to say, wait a second, they're all different. And yet they're all the same around Jesus. There's something that unites them around God. And so he says there's a power in this new command. And this power is one of inclusion. Look at the contrast. The new command is a Jesus community. And there's an ethical expansion. So there was an ethnic limitation. Jesus creates an ethical expansion. Now, besides just a play on words, what's ethics? What are ethics? Are there? What are they? What's morals, what is right and wrong. Exactly. So if someone is, even in our own political society, if someone is in political trouble, they may have to come before the ethics committee, right? And answer questions about their moral behavior, right? And we live in a world that has, a very varying concepts about what morality is, but Jesus creates an ethical expansion. He creates a bigger moral picture. That he's, I want you to look beyond just your race. I want you to look beyond just your differences. And I want you to begin to love one another in this community of faith. But it wasn't a stopping place. It was a starting place. It wasn't a place that limited their love. It was a place that would expand their ability to love. And so I want to show you a few ways that takes place. You think about John 3:16, right? You may not have John 13, 34, and 35 memorized yet, but you probably know most of John 3:16, right? For God so loved the Jewish people that he sent his Jewish son to die for the sins of Jews. Right? No, it doesn't say that, does it? It's for God so loved the... Does that sound limiting or expansive? Expansive. You see, this new command was a door to expand the idea of what love does. Love does not stay with us four and no more. Love expands out. Love is not concerned with just loving those people that are like us, but also loving people who don't even like us. That kind of love, the new ethical expansion, is one that's not concerned about only loving those that are in our clique, but loving those people that we don't even click with. I mean, God wants us to be to love so extravagantly that we can love people that are extremely different than we are. We can be kind and patient with and express God's transforming love to, because it's that love that will have the most powerful influence on changing their perspective of who God is. You see, there's a whole new focus, and this focus has to do with inclusion, not exclusion. So my question for you is, with whom and where are you learning to be inclusive? I mean, it's very easy to be exclusive, right? To just be with your four and want no more. But where are you learning to say, how are we being more inclusive and loving of others? Are you learning that? Because the people of God, Jesus is saying, should learn to do that. They should have this amazing ability to include others. So not only is there a new focus, there's also a new standard. So let's say our verse again, okay? You're going to get the verse here today. So, a new command I give you, as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, all men will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. Think about the middle section. Jesus, as I have loved you. Now, so here's the new standard. The old standard said, love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, the old standard is your own ability to determine what good love is. Of course I'm loving. Very loving person, right? Until someone makes you mad, and then you're not as loving as you used to be, right? Is it kind of easy? Kind of look at this little chart over here. I think it's kind of easy in this kind of old standard of love your neighbor as yourself, that the golden rule has a vulnerability, and the vulnerability is it has an intrinsic bent towards subjectivity. It has an intrinsic, that means always been there, an intrinsic bent towards subjectivity. Can you recognize that a lot of times you're not very objective? Anybody willing to confess that with a right hand of confession? Right foot of confession? I mean, just kind of think, I'm not always super objective. Sometimes I see things and they're really askew, Amen? Is that true? Yes, this is a time for, I'm going to give you elbow permission. You can just, let the person know next to you, you're kind of subjective sometimes. You can see things from your own perspective and ignore everybody else's perspective and even God's, right? And so the old standard had a vulnerability towards an intrinsic subjectivity that only sees things the way I see them. I think we're vulnerable to this all the time. I mean, think about it. You can just look at life, right? When the other fellow doesn't do it, he's lazy. When I don't do it, I was busy. When the other fellow does it without being told, he's overstepping his bounds. When I do without being told, well, that's initiative. When this other fellow states his opinion strongly, he is bullheaded. When I state my opinion strongly, I'm firm. When the other fellow overlooks a few rules of etiquette, he is so rude. When I skip a few rules, I'm doing my own thing, right? I mean, I think that the subjectivity thing is so true about us, we miss it most of the time. Why? Because we're subjective, right? If I'm subjective, I have a hard time seeing beyond my own perspective. And the new command has a new standard. You're not the standard of love. Jesus is. It's not as yourself, it's as I have loved you. And so do you want to be the marker of what people should say, oh, I'm going to love like they do? Well, I would only want that to be true of me if I was hot on the tail of Jesus, loving just like him. Because in my subjectivity, my love will fall short. But Jesus' love will always stand apart and different in contrast. And that's how I want to love. I want to love like that. I want to love like that. So you think about that objectivity, we need that. So here's a few things that I want to point out, because whenever Jesus said something in the Gospels, kind of as you read the Bible, we read the words of Christ in the Gospels, and then you read beyond the Gospels and you get the book of Acts, which is the expansion of the church. And during the expansion of the church, there were all kinds of other letters written, a lot by the Apostle Paul. After Acts is done and the history kind of closes out for us, we still have letters popping up from Peter, and John writes his, and we've got these things called epistles. They're letters. They were letters sent to believers to coach them on how to follow through on what Jesus told us to do. Does that make sense? That's kind of the New Testament. The words of Christ in the Gospels, the expansion of the early church, then the followers of Jesus, the disciples and apostles, sending letters to the other new believers, coaching them through the Scriptures on how to follow through on what Jesus said. So if Jesus said he's given a new command, and that new command is not to love like we would love, but to love like he would love, then we should see remnants of that in the epistles. Does that make sense? So let me give you a few cases. John, the beloved, who in this very context of John 13 is the one reclining against Jesus and asking, who is going to betray you? That John says this in 1 John chapter 2, verse 5. He says, this is how we know we are in him. Whoever claims to live in him must walk as Jesus did. Must walk as Jesus did. So if there's going to be some sort of evidence that we are really belong to God, are you walking like Jesus? Are you loving like Jesus? Well, how would Jesus love? Okay, let's look at a few other options, other examples. Romans chapter 15, verse 7 says, accept one another then, just as your mama accepted you. Is that what it says? Maybe your mama's really accepting. It's really great. But she ain't the standard either, right? Accept one another just as, what? Christ has accepted you. You see the similarity? Love as I have loved you. Accept as he accepted us. Let's look at Ephesians chapter 4, verse 32. It says, be kind and compassionate to one another. That's a great idea. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other just as Christ has forgiven you. So the new standard flows right into the epistles, right into the writings, the rest of the New Testament, that no longer, we're not the standard, he is. There's a new focus. There's a new standard. And that standard requires this idea that we understand that, when I really love someone, I'm willing to move way past the old standard. The old standard of treat your neighbor good, the golden rule, filled with subjectivity. You know what it is? It's civility. The old standard had civility. It's like, hi there, sir. Nice to meet you. Dave, right?
Yes.
Glad you're here. It's cordial, Terry, right? Yeah, good to see you. Good to see you, Terry. There's a civility about the old command. There's a neighbor. Be neighborly. It's civil, right? Be civil, right? The new standard has less to do with civility, although that's a good starting place, but it's not a good stopping place. For them, it was a stopping place. I'm going to stop at being civil. Some of you are married, and you're so contentious in your marriage, the best you can do is be civil. And that will never change your marriage. Some of you at work have contentious relationships, and the best you can do in your flesh is to be civil. But that will never transform your workplace. Because when Jesus said to the disciples, love as I have loved you, they would remember that only moments earlier he was on his knees and washing their feet. I don't have any water, Anthony. I can massage them. There's something about service that gets up close and personal. There's something about service that says, I'm willing to lay down my rights and be concerned about yours. My interests and concern about yours. My honor and concern about yours. You see how Jesus is raising the standard? It's no longer just about civility. The kind of church that will change the world is one that is driven out of a heart to serve. So that brings us back to our Savior and says, Lord, how can I do that? Because so often I'm just civil. But civility will not change your neighbor. Civility will not be evangelistic. It will take service. What if, even in this season, your neighbor who you've been civil with, you tried to look for ways to serve? What if, even in the context of your own marriage, that you've kind of given up hope for and you felt the best you could do is be civil? What if you started to extravagantly serve? What might that do to open their hearts to Jesus? That's going to require something. It's not just a new focus. It's not just a new standard. There's got to be a new power. The third thing. Number 3 is a new power. And so I just want to say you. As I have loved you. I'm going to focus on as I have loved you. There's a difference between seeing love and being loved, right? Right? You can, all you ladies who like Hallmark, you love seeing love. I love a Hallmark show. I love my wife, and when she's watching the 3rd Hallmark show, I'm just saying, I've had enough. I've had enough of seeing love. I want to get some love. That's what I want. You can have that feeling, right? We all see love. There's a difference, though, between seeing it. You can see it, and when you see it, you want it. You go, I wish I had that kind of love. And Hallmark does a great job, right? There's always a happy ending at the end of a Hallmark show. You can see love and you can want that love, but Jesus says, that's not what I want you to do. I want you to love as I have loved you. You. He wants to love you. He wants just to show you love. He wants you to experience love. He wants that power not to be something just out there on the outside. He wants that to become something on the inside because you've had it. You've experienced that acceptance of Christ, that forgiveness of Christ, which gives you this new ability to give what you wouldn't give in your flesh, that sinful bent that you have. But by the power of His Spirit in you, you can say, God, I want to love like that. A lot of us are kind of like the old standard. We're held back by the law because we get kind of anal. We get kind of, legalistic. We get kind of so punitive if people don't do things the way we think they should be done. You ever that way? That's kind of a law-driven mentality, that the world should all straighten up and fly right in order to be accepted by me. Is that how Jesus accepted you? Did He wait until you got straightened out and flew right before He accepted you? Or did He just accept you? And that changed the way you wanted to fly. That's what He did with me. His love changes my desire to fly better, to be a straighter shooter. I'm glad He didn't wait till I was a straight shooter to love me. His love makes me want to be a straight shooter. His love makes me want to change. And so I got to have that experience. And so some of us, we've got to drop the rules and stop getting so bent out of shape because the world doesn't fit into your nice, neat box. There's a funny story I like true story about a woman who lived in Bakersfield, and she went to Lake Isabella. Lake Isabella, which is east of Bakersfield. Anybody ever been there? Lake Isabella? A few of you have. There is water somewhere close to Bakersfield. That's good. If there's anything living close to Bakersfield, that's good. So she wanted to learn how to ski, and so she had some resources. She bought a 22-foot Bayliner ski boat. And it's pretty independent. She happened to be blonde, but pretty independent. So she took the boat up and she went out skiing at Lake Isabella. And so she's out there and she's trying to get this boat to perform. And so she just, gets out there and it's kind of, idling, and she, and the boat's just going, water. It's just, the nose isn't coming up. It's just not performing very well. She throttles back and gives it another shot. And, it's going, but the no nose up, and not going very fast. And she's like really frustrated. She's paid, a mint for this boat. She, kind of idles back in toward the dock and waves over some guys and says, "Hey guys, would you please help me? This is a brand new boat. It's brand new. The nose won't even come up. So watch." And she turns around, she gives it full throttle, and they're like, "Wow, that's really weird," right? She came back, the guys got in, they tried it full throttle, nose doesn't come up. Finally, one of the guys goes, "I'm just going to check and see if there's anything with the hull, anything underneath the boat, the motor." So he dove into the water. He's down there for a little bit. He comes out of the water, spitting and laughing hilariously, and says, "She never unhooked the boat from the trailer." Well, she backed it up and just unhitched, parked the car. It's pretty impressive the boat still floated, huh? With a trailer attached. We got to drop the trailer. You were made to stay behind something else. And the law was meant to be a guide, not a captive. It was meant to be a guide for you, not to hold you captive. It was meant to move you forward, but not to hold you back. You got to drop the trailer. You got to drop all the rules and all the things everybody's got to fall into, because if you want to wreck a relationship, add more rules. Add more rules to your relationship and find your relationship diminishing from life and struggling to find air. That's what it'll do. That's what the law did. There was nothing wrong with the law. There's nothing wrong with the good standards. But if that's what drives your relationship will never get its nose out of the water. And God wants you to learn to love more extravagantly. There was a fellow that was blessed by a wealthy brother. His brother decided to give him a Corvette. That's cool. Let's not go to envy right now. Let's stick with me. Okay, and so he thought, "I'm going to drive my new car into the old neighborhood." And so he lived in a big city, and so he kind of went to the old neighborhood and was just kind of, cruising through nice and slow and, waving at everybody, his new car. And a little boy, about 9 years of age, was running alongside on the sidewalk, waving, and you could just tell that he was impressed by this car, and it was going extra slow, and the kid was just enthralled with it. It was beautiful. And so he says, he rolled down his window and says, "Hey kid, you want to ride?" "I'd love a ride in your new car." And so kid jumped in the car. The guy took him for a spin, took it out on the freeway, let loose for a little bit, brought him back, talking the whole way through, told him the whole story. "My brother gave me this car. It's so wild. My brother's really generous, and it was amazing. I love this car. What do you like this car?" "This car is so cool. The seats are leather, and the dash looks like made of wood. All these little," he was looking at everything. He was just so amazed by it. And so he was about to get out of the car, and the kid was trying to say something about the car. He goes, what I really wish is," and the guy knew what he was going to say. He said, "I wish I had a car like this. I wish I had a brother like that would give me a car." He just knew what he was going to say. And then it surprised him, because he turned and says, "I wish I could be a brother like that. I wish I could love my little brother like that." That's what Jesus wants us to do. Jesus wants us to see his love in such a way that we're just not so consumed about, "I wish I could get love like that." It's available for you. And Jesus' love is available. You just got to receive it. But he wants us to say, "I want to love like that. I want to love like he loves. I want to have a generous spirit like he has a generous spirit to forgive not just some of my sins, but all of my sins. I want to love like that. I want to love so I don't accept some people, those that are like me, or those that look good, or those that are entertaining. But I want to accept people that are nothing like me, so I can have the opportunity to love like that." You see, there's a new focus and a new standard, but there requires a new power, and that power is the power of his Spirit that he gives us, because you cannot love like that in your flesh. You just won't. You can't. And so here's the deal. Every time you get tired and feel like, "I just can't love like that," that's your flesh speaking. That's not the Spirit of God speaking to you. When you want to quit, the Spirit's not a quitter. The Spirit will give you a rest. The Spirit knows you might be fatigued because you've been trying to white knuckle your way into being a good lover, and it's just not working very well. Then you need his Spirit's presence. Look what it says. The next passage of Scripture in Corinthians, it says, He has made us competent. And some of you do not feel very competent. He's made us competent as ministers of a what? Of a new covenant. Isn't it interesting? We got a new command and a new covenant, all found in the New Testament, that tells us about this new plan that God has for us to be amazing lovers. That new power, he says, why? Because not from the letter of the law, not from the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter kills. More rules in your relationship will just wear your relationship out. But the Spirit gives life. Gives life. God, I want the Spirit to lead me into life, don't you? That requires this discernment that has to happen in us, that we can begin to recognize, oh, that's my flesh. Because I'm just wanting to throw them under a bus. Right? But the Spirit says, I want to throw them a lifeline. I want to rescue them from the bus. I want to reach where I've never reached before. I want to give what I've not given before. I want to listen better than I've ever listened before. I want to care more than I've ever cared before. And that requires us saying, God, would you help me to die to my fleshly compulsions, my inherently intrinsic subjectivity, and stop letting my own standard, me, be the standard, but let you be the standard. Because when that happens, the fourth thing, there's a whole new outcome. There's a whole new outcome, and that new outcome is simply the last little bit. As I have loved you, a new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this amazing love, when it happens, it's beautiful to see it happen. I get to enjoy community with guys that I just do life with. And I just see love happen over and over and over again. It's amazing. And I see people look in from the outside and go, hi, guys, you guys are really tight. Well, we're just trying to do life. We're just trying to love like Jesus loved. That's all we're doing. And you can join the love fest if you want. You can join. You can plug in. You can be a part of this loving community of growing disciples, mentoring the next generation to live the mission of Jesus through the power of the gospel. You're invited. And when that happens, when you step into that, others go, oh, I want to be a part of that. That's what the world should say. The world should look and say, I want to be a part of that. When Jesus finishes this discipleship upper room discourse in chapter 17 of John, right in the middle of chapter 17, Jesus is in the middle of a prayer. And he's been praying up to verse 20 for his disciples that were with him then. And then in verse 20 it says, my prayer is not for them alone. I also pray for those who will believe in me. What does he say? That all of them may be one, Father. Just as you are in me and I am in you, may they also be in us. Look, listen, here it is again. So that, you see it? So that the world will believe that you've sent me. I want to love like that. How about you? I want to love like that. Sheldon Van Nocken, C.S. Lewis's nephew, wrote a book called A Severe Mercy. And in there he says that the greatest argument for Christianity is Christians. Their joy, their certainty, their completeness. But the strongest argument against Christianity is also Christians. When they're somber and joyless, when they're self-righteous and smug and complacent consecration, then Christianity dies 1,000 deaths. You see, you and I have the chance and the choice to make our faith deathly or full of life. What do you want it to be? It will require you tapping into the Spirit and putting out the flesh. And when that happens, you'll recognize there's a new standard, and the standard's not you. The standard is Him. And there's a new focus that says, I need to be a part of community, loving community, where I'm learning to love better. Would you bow your heads with me? Heavenly Father, we simply want to want to be courageous enough to take whatever step you're nudging our heart to take today. That means we've got to be honest enough with ourselves to say, I'm struggling to love well. I felt that many times. And, rather than getting so depressed about you not loving well, just recognize that's where you're going to come to in your flesh over and over again. You're going to come right back there. But guess what? He has given you His Spirit. And His Spirit has the power to set us free from the power of sin. His Spirit has the power to see ourselves as adopted by God. His Spirit has the power to give life to our mortal bodies. His Spirit has power to look up and say, Abba, Father, Daddy God, I want to love like you. I want to love like Jesus. I want to love like that. God, help me abandon my flesh and pursue loving like you. I need your power. Just tell him, just agree with me right now, just in your own heart with the Lord. I know because you're human, you've come to the end of yourself before, but what do you do then? Do you just go back to yourself as the standard? Back to your own subjective criticism? Back to your own subjective evaluation of how everybody should be doing things different? Or do you go to the Jesus standard and say, I want to love like that? Just ask him for that strength. Ask him for that new insight. Lord, open our eyes to see the beauty of the new command. Lord, the focus of the new command, the standard, the power. Lord, let our community of believers have an outcome that draws the world in. Thank you, Jesus. If you've never accepted Christ, you've never said yes to him, I just want to invite you right now. If you've never done that, you're hearing all this and it sounds good, it sounds challenging, but you don't know how you can do it. Well, you can never do it on your strength. And if you've been trying to do it on your own strength, you're going to get tired and weary really fast. But when you do it on Jesus' strength, it's renewable energy. His power source is always there. But it's got to be inhabited. It's got to be embraced on the inside. If you've never said yes to Jesus, just whisper this little prayer with me. Just say, Father, I just confess I've been doing it on my own, trying to be good on my own, trying to do right on my own. I'm tired and I need you. Just tell him, God, I'm tired. I need you. I need your power. Please come in me. Come in my heart. Come in my life. Change my thoughts. Help me to renew my mind. God, I submit as best as I know how, my heart and soul to you. Show yourself in my life, Lord God. You know, when that happens, we start sensing, man, the love of God is so powerful. The love of God is so amazing. It's so transforming that we just want to sing about it. We just want to sing. That's what worship is. Worship is being overcome with the awareness of God's love, and you just want to say it out loud in song. And so would you just sing a few lines of this chorus with me?